Welcome to My Favourite Beatles Song, the podcast where we celebrate the music of the Beatles with a distinguished guest. I'm Tim Tucker, and today I'll be talking with Rob Williams, writer for comics, film and TV. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Can you tell us a bit about what you've written?
Well, I started out, and I think we first met. I was a journalist for many years, a freelance journalist, and I trained as a freelance journalist and worked for all kinds of magazines, glamorous sounding ones like GQ, very unglamorous ones like the British Journal of Optometry, as anyone who's ever been a freelancer knows all too well. And then I kind of fell into writing comic books. I'd always loved comics growing up. It was never really my intention. I thought I'd give it a go, and I wrote one, and that did kind of well and got attention and led to other jobs. And I ended up sort of unexpectedly and rather sort of pleasantly segueing into a career as a comic writer, where I've written for like Marvel Comics and DC Comics. I've written Suicide Squad and Superman and Spider-Man and Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Ones. I've written a lot of big ones. And Judge Dredd, a lot of Judge Dredd for 2008, the last 20 years. And then in the last few years, I've been writing for TV and film. A lot of stuff is in development. I'm doing little rabbit ears in the air because things can be in development for a long time. Actually, I can't talk too much about it, but a feature, a low budget feature film that I've written is being filmed right now. And once we finish talking, I'm heading to the set. So that's kind of exciting.
Fantastic.
So yeah, I mean, it's a freelance writer's life, basically. Yeah. You end up sort of flitting between one job and another job, and you know, I've been very fortunate to do it for probably 25 years now.
I want to ask you two key questions before we get started. One, how would you rate your fandom of the Beatles on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, I struggle with this. I mean, I don't have any kind of Alan Partridge-y type of tattoos over my body or anything. I've never even been to Liverpool and seen all the kind of, you know, gone to the Cavern Club and all those kind of things. So I would struggle to put myself too high. But what I would say is I've read an inordinate amount of books about the Beatles over the years. They are probably my favourite band of all time. The fascination with them is long-standing. I mean, I remember I think picking up in my local library when I was a teenager, a book written by one of the Beatles roadies, who was best man at John and Yoko's wedding. And that led to me reading then. Enjoyed that. I read the Hunter Davis biography. I was probably about 16, 17 at that point. And I'll go a year and I'll kind of go, oh, I've read everything there is to read about the Beatles. And then I'll read another one. So it just sort of sticks with me. And I'm sure we'll end up discussing, there are quite personal moments in my life which the Beatles have come to be the soundtrack for in that way, that when music means a lot to you, it happens that way. So it's a very long-winded way of saying a 7.
7, great. My second question is, have you ever either met, interacted with, seen live, or in any other way had some kind of encounter with the Beatles or their entourage?
Sadly not. So that probably downgrades me to about a 5, or at least a 6 maybe instead. No, I've never seen any of them live. I mean, I'd love to see Paul play, and it's always been, frankly, just ridiculously expensive when I have tried a couple of times and just haven't been able to get tickets when he's toured in most recent years. No, that's a sad no from me, Tim, I'm afraid.
There's still an opportunity. He's just on tour again, isn't he?
Before he played Glastonbury, he was playing a warm-up gig in Frome or something like that. Was it last year or the year before? And I was in the pub. And I got because I'm on his mailing list, and it popped up like this was happening, and I mean I was on hold with the pub because I live in just outside Bristol, and I was thinking, oh my God, I could go to a local club and see, but of course there was no chance.
Yeah, so. I tried that as well. I was in an airport actually at the time, so it was even more remote.
Yeah.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.
You've chosen Blackbird. It was recorded at Abbey Road on June the 11th, 1968, by Paul McCartney on his own, in Studio 2, apparently while Lennon was also recording Revolution 9 in Studio 3, which is quite an interesting parallel. This was during sessions for the Beatles album, which is most commonly known as the White Album. That album was released in the UK on the 22nd of November, 1968, and in the US on the 25th of November, and went straight to #1 in the UK, stayed there for 9 weeks. Took a couple of weeks to get to #1 in the US, but it also stayed there for 9 weeks there. It was huge seller, the White Album, the biggest selling double album of all time for many years, well, for a few years until the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack overtook it. By 1970, its sales were already at 6.5 million. So those are the basic facts about Blackbird. Tell us a bit about why you chose this song as your favorite.
It's a very personal reason. It's basically when my 2 children were babies, it was what I put on to put them to sleep late at night. So, and it's there's a weird kind of thing where, I don't know, probably because I love the Beatles, I always thought before I had children, I had a mad idea. I thought, do you know what? Golden Slumbers is going to be a song I play to my kids to put, a lullaby to put them to sleep. But of course, Golden Slumbers doesn't work at all, because even though the lyrics are beautifully, all about that sort of, and, smiles await you while you rise, which is a beautiful little refrain. But he kind of bellows it, you know what I mean? It's not really putting anyone to sleep. They'll go, Golden Slumbers, the kids would be like, what? No one's getting to sleep to Golden Slumbers. But Blackbird is, it's just, there are far more sophisticated and cool Beatles songs, but at the end of the day, it's such a pretty, beautiful little sort of acoustic, refrain. And it's very unpretentious, and it's very Paul. And like you said, I absolutely love the fact that when Paul was recording it, John and Yoko, down the corridor doing Revolution 9, which is, if you wanted a more, there it is, like, where's the band splitting? Where are we heading in different directions at this point? I know all the saccharine sort of labels can be thrown at Paul, but it's for whatever reason, he got this one spot on, and I think it is symbolic. It hangs back. I mean, I know he's talked a lot about, how it's about the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King had just been assassinated a few weeks beforehand. I mean, one other thing I love about them as well is there's a suspicion that Blackbird, he's talking about a black girl, which is very unsophisticated, which is almost like his working class Liverpool sort of upbringing, right? And when you hear that, you kind of wince a bit. But whether it's a happy accident or not, by him sort of having the symbolism of it just being a bird, it just leaves it open to, it just pulls back from that being way too on the nose, which Paul can sometimes do. And it hits that sweet spot, I think, where it's just, A, it's a beautiful song, and B, it leaves a lot of things open to interpretation, I think.
Originally, I had in mind a black woman during the civil rights time, when people were being excluded back of the bus. People couldn't go in hotels. Black people in America particularly couldn't go, in South Africa. Didn't have access to the places that white people had. So for me, it was there was a civil rights aspect, and I used the Blackbird as a kind of symbol of a black woman in the South. And you were only waiting for this moment to arise, you're finally getting your rights. So it's kind of symbolic of that. So that's another reason I like it, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, it's funny that reminds me, because when I saw Paul live in Earl's Court back in about 2002 or 3, he introduces Blackbird by saying, and he's obviously got his patter down for it. He's on a world tour, and he says, in England, back in England, we call girls birds. And this is, and he goes into that spiel. I'm thinking, you're in England. You've obviously forgotten. You're in London. You're talking to people who know what you're talking about. But I think he must have been, by that point in the tour, got used to sort of having to explain.
I think the patter is word for word. It's written before, and it doesn't matter where he's playing, does it? But it's also, I'm sure you've listened to it. There's an amazing Beatles anthology revisited, which is this long-standing, for people who don't know, if you can find it online, sort of put together by fans. It's sort of a history of the Beatles in such minutiae and with interview clips. And there's kind of like a fascinating thing. I think maybe the first time, I forget, the Beatles tour in America or go to America, and they see the civil rights, what's going on with the civil rights movement. There's a little interview with Paul. He just goes, well, we just think it's daft.
I think it'd be a bit silly to segregate people because, I mean, I don't think coloured people are any different. They're just the same as anyone else. But, over here, there are some people who think that they're sort of animals or something, but I just think it's stupid, You can't treat other human beings like animals. And so, I mean, I wouldn't mind them sitting next to me. Great, because it's the way we all feel. And a lot of people in England feel that way, because there's never any segregation in concerts in England. And in fact, if there was, we probably wouldn't play them,
Which is a really, again, sweet, low-key thing to say about something as, that level of sort of hatred and what people were suffering and what people were fighting against, So he does tend to bring a kind of a quite sweet, innocent sort of sensibility to a subject such as this, I think.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life you were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night.
It's a fascinating album, the White Album, isn't it? Because it's recorded, as you say, in a year 1968 where it was all kicking off with riots in France and Paris. There's the death of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. There's all kinds of disruption in the civil rights movement. And they're, of course, off in Rishikesh, along with other rich, famous people in a very secluded part of the world, writing acoustic songs because there wasn't any electricity. Although I have to say that according to my sources, he wrote this in Scotland on his farm. So I don't think this was actually written in Rishikesh. But...
Yeah, I've read the same, but he wrote it in Kintyre, but they'd only just come back, I think. And obviously they just, there was a lot of Dear Prudence and things like that.
Yeah.
Mother Nature's,
all those I Will and many of them. Yeah.
It's kind of weird as well. I find it interesting. They went to Rishikesh and they're obviously they're all there together. And I know sort of Ringo goes home early because he has food poisoning and stuff like that, which again is a lovely little kind of very down to earth working class sort of reaction to that kind of transcendental meditation Indian guru lifestyle. But they seem really, really tight there. And then there are various comments about on the White Album. I read in one book, and I forget which one, but when Clapton goes in and plays on My Guitar Gently Weeps, he came out and he said, well, it was pretty clear that they just didn't like each other at that point. And then, again, when you sort of look in, I read up last night a little bit about sort of the background of a recording of Blackbird, and I forget, one of the engineers says pretty much the same thing at that point. And in fact, George and Ringo, I think, are off in the States or something while Blackbird's being recorded.
That's right, yeah.
They're very, there's a real feeling at this point that it has fractured. But I find it really interesting that they go from Rishikesh being all together, let's go off to the other side of the world, and even then you listen to the Escher demos, and they are sort of, they sound like they're having fun, and that's the whole thing with Get Back, which was the disparity. There's been so much written about how they didn't get on, but there are periods where plainly they still are getting on, and they still do seem to like each other a great deal.
In the White Album box set, you can hear, and in the notes, John is in the studio control room with George Martin while he's playing back the song Blackbird and making suggestions. So they're still working as a pair there, even though, as you say, George and Ringo are away. And they're making observations about how they might add instruments to it. Paul's thinking maybe some strings. I love that John says that a nice bit of brass band on there. I don't know how he thought that. But in the end, they don't.
I read that, and it's apparently they were both really into a Harry Nilsson album at the time, and so I think that was just what they were listening to. But I also read that in the Rolling Stones interview John does in 1980. Apparently, he says of Blackbird, he goes, "I gave I give Paul a really important line in that, but the rest is all him. So, and yeah, it's credited Lennon and McCartney, but
Yeah.
again, I think that, if that's true, which it probably is, that's what they were brilliant at, right? I mean, basically, they both pulled each other just back from the edge at certain times, and maybe it would have been just Paul's tendency to go in a little bit too saccharine, and it might have been that on the nose thing, which could have spoiled it.
Yeah, so obviously they're still working as a partnership. The fact that this is a solo Paul song isn't the first time of that either, because obviously yesterday he'd played just his guitar with strings, Paul McCartney, and they discussed at the time whether that should be a solo record, and they ended up calling it a Beatles record. But as you say, on the White Album, there are times when they're off doing their own thing and coming together to maybe make key decisions. And just back on what you said about the Escher demos, it's interesting that Paul's songs, more than anything, come fully formed, don't they? They seem to be. And in all the Escher demos, they seem almost there. I mean, there's a few structural things about Blackbird that change. Specifically, George Martin suggests stopping and then a sort of false ending.
Yep.
But I love the Escher demo. I think you can hear the guitar much more clearly in the Escher demo, and there's something about it that's more slightly rawer.
Blackbird fly, Blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night.
It came out of the Bach piece, basically, that he and George practiced when they were much younger. And I'm going to mispronounce this, but it's called Buri in E minor, apparently, which is sort of has similar kind of harmonics, which I'm not a musician, so I'll leave that alone.
The story behind it is that when George and I were kids in Liverpool, we grew up playing guitar together, and one of the things we would have was a kind of party piece, just occasionally, just to show people we weren't as thick as we looked. So we would play a little piece, and actually we got it wrong, but we played a little piece that was by Bach. And the thing we liked about it was it had a melody line and a bass line going at the same time. It was this piece. Really should go do 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 do, but we didn't know that bit. So it was our little show-off party piece. And actually, the bit where we went wrong is I later took that, the idea that you got the bass line on the top line, the melody, and turned it into Blackbird.
I mean, he is a genius. It was like when you watch Get Back and you saw him just pull that song out of kind of thin air while sort of Ringo and George kind of sit on. He is just got an instinctive songwriting sort of, he's one of the greatest of all time, and sort of it does feel fully formed. And the songs, I love the Escher demos. It sounds like they just pop round to have a cuppa and they're just going to play you a couple of songs. You know what I mean? For all the kind of orchestration, which is wonderful, and on the recorded versions, and they sound like they're on a laugh. They're just kind of joining in with each other and sort of doing silly background vocals and stuff. It's great.
There's also musically a bit of a change going on, isn't there? Only a year before, they'd been fully hyped up in the studio with psychedelia, wringing the last bit of technology out of a 4-track studio. And now everything's stripped back, isn't it? And it's not just them, it's other artists like the Stones and Bob Dylan and the band are suddenly going very simple. And you get a lot of that on the White Album, don't you?
Well, the Helter Skelter is kind of like, they'd seen The Who, and basically that's where Helter Skelter comes from, because it does kind of like just blast you out. Like, what is this? That's the thing with it being a double album. I guess they all have the ability to just try as many things as we actually want, which is one of the wonderful things. Actually, saying about Helter Skelter, that's reminded me something about Blackbird, which I wasn't aware of, which was the fact that apparently Charles Manson and his group, everyone knows the Helter Skelter, that they felt that was their call to sort of go off and start a race war. But Blackbird too, as well, which is mental, considering it's such a beautiful, pretty little tune. And the Manson family decided, no, there's a message here for us. They're telling us to go off and start a race war, which is just
It is a disturbing album, the White Album. You can see how anyone with a disturbed mind might be triggered, can't you? Because there are elements that are fearful, like Helter Skelter and Revolution Number 9, and elements that are kind of cryptic, like Cry Baby Cry and Happiness is a Warm Gun. It can mess with your mind, can't it?
It's got all kinds of different levels going on. Some of it is like the soap opera of here's where we are as these celebrities right now. Look at us now, and then sort of fun sort of country stuff like Rocky Raccoon and stuff, and but it's
pastiche.
It's all great. You know what I mean? It works, and they just chuck in so many sort of genres at everything, you know. And considering if Clapton's right, they didn't really like each other that much at that point, if that's true. And you presume he got that from George, because he was best mates with George and going out all the time with George. So George is probably moaning to him, basically. And the rest of them might be getting on okay-ish, you know what I mean? But he's like, George has just been in his ear, you imagine, just kind of going, Paul's telling me to redo that guitar part again.
John had just met Yoko, and that did seriously seem to disrupt his relationship to McCartney. And I'm by no means saying that's Yoko's fault, by the way, but that is a key moment, isn't it? I think that's coming in. She's coming into the studio, which is not something they've done before.
And that's another thing I read about Blackbird is when it was recorded, he apparently did 32 takes. So some of the takes, at least, his Paul's girlfriend was sat at his feet and he was playing to her. And it's I forget her name now because he'd broken up with Jane Asher, and it's before he met Linda Eastman. And there was almost like a suggestion that, oh, well, if Yoko's been invited into the studio, then I'm going to invite my girlfriend in as well. You know what I mean? And so there's little power things going on.
Now, that reminds me that there's a story that he serenaded some fans outside his house. Have you heard that story with Blackbird? On the very day that Linda came to live with him in London. Yeah. Which is a nice image, isn't it? Perched there on his windowsill playing Blackbird.
But the interaction with the fans that just sat outside his house day and night is just like...
So 3 microphones were used, one for his voice, one for his guitar, and that tapping sound, which some assume is a metronome, is actually his foot tapping. So there's a microphone on that as well. 3 microphones is quite excessive for a one-man performance, but... and then there was some controversy, some discussion about whether to add the birds at the end. It was hotly debated within the Beatles. You can imagine why, because as you said earlier about, Paul's temptation to get maybe twee about it.
Yeah.
Singing in the dead of night.
By all accounts, some of the bird song on it is from a recording, and some of it is from one of the engineers' gardens in Ickenham or something. I just think it's a really beautiful little thing, and just the fact, an entire album of it would be way too much. But considering, as we said, it's on the same record as Helter Skelter, which is again is Paul, is just like. Okay, you can do what you like, Nick, at this point.
Absolutely. It's interesting as well, the afterlife of the song for Paul. He came back to this theme in 2 key songs of his solo career. With on Band on the Run, he did a song called Bluebird.
Late at night when the wind is still, I'll come flying through your door, and you'll know what love is for. I'm a bluebird, I'm a bluebird, I'm a bluebird, I'm a bluebird, yeah. I'm a bluebird, I'm a bluebird, I'm a bluebird, yeah.
I struggle with Wings. I do, as much as I love the Beatles, something about Wings I really struggle with, and I don't know what I couldn't put my finger on why.
As Alan Partridge said, the band the Beatles could have been. But,
very much so. The best of the Beatles, I think we can all agree.
And later again, and very explicitly in a song called Jenny Wren, obviously it's got the word wren, which is a bird. It's played very similarly on an acoustic guitar in a very similar picking style. And there's something about that picking style, by the way, that other people find difficult. I don't know if you play guitar. I play acoustic guitar, and I can play Blackbird, but only in my way, which is a sort of finger picking way. And I don't know any other guitarist who can play it the same way as Paul. He sort of does a thumb with a flick, which is very strange. But he does the same with Jenny Wren as well, which is a lovely song.
Like so many girls, Jenny Wren could sing, but a broken heart took her song away.
So it does seem to have stuck with him, and he's played it live many times, of course, with Wings and Beyond on his solo tours.
It's like I was saying, it's going that personal thing going full circle. I played it with my son and my daughter when they were, when they were very small children and babies, and now my son's, got his own band, and occasionally I hear him playing it through the door, and he's in his room, he's playing it on his acoustic guitar, and and that's the other thing with the Beatles is, I was a few years ago is personal connections. My mother was dying, and I was driving back and forth on the motorway every day, and I'd be about 3 hours every day to go to the hospital to visit her. And that Beatles anthology revisited was I would play that in the car at the time, and that kind of was like my little kind of keeping me sort of sane. But I don't know if you know the Beatles anthology revisited, but at the start they play a little guitar refrain from In My Life, basically, to start every episode. It's weird. It's just like, I was driving last week, actually, and I was in the car, and that came on the radio, and they played it, and it's almost like a Proustian thing to putting me back, sort of to go into the hospital to visit my mum. And I got a bit teary-eyed. Just that guitar refrain, just hearing that ding, 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 ding. And it's like, everyone's like this, I guess, with their favorites, but it's just like, it's weird the way bits of a Beatles song sort of permeate your life, basically, and have connections with you and sort of stick with you over the years.
And now I can totally relate to that. It's a beautiful piece, and when you master it on guitar, it takes a lot to get it right. But kudos to your son, because it is a tricky one. You can't just play it with a plectrum. You have to sort of use your thumb and fingers.
I would say that I don't know if he's played it all the way through. I've heard him play parts of it, put it that way. But yeah, because
it's such a musically rich song, there are diminished chords in there, there are passing chords. It's been very much appreciated by serious musicians. You get the likes of Brad Meldau, who did a beautiful piano version of it. And probably my favourite, legendary bassist Jaco Pastorius, who was the bassist for Weather Report and Joni Mitchell and many others, did a fantastic bass-led version of this using fretless bass and some wild percussion, which I think takes this to a whole new level as an instrumental. You're not the only person to have chosen this song. So Colin Bluntstone of the Zombies, he said, I always imagine Paul on his own in Studio 3 while the rest muck about with Revolution 9. It's a beautiful chord progression, showing that Bach influence and a wonderful performance. You can also take the lyrics on many levels, one being segregation in the States. But even if you don't accept that, it just sounds remarkably fresh and timeless and as beautiful as it did in 1968.
Yeah, says it better than I have.
Now, obviously, I've been hugely unfair asking you to choose one song. So what other songs would you like to give a nod to that have particular resonance for you from the Beatles?
Well, I spoke about sort of in my life from a personal reason. I mean, I listen. There's all kinds of things pop up. I mean, I was looking through a list when you asked me, to do this, and I was looking at what other people had chosen, and I thought, well, maybe I'll do She Said, She Said, which is one I always just love, basically. But someone had beat me to it, and I probably wouldn't have had as much of a same connection. But that strikes me as a track that just feels Look, there's indie rock basically, and just like way ahead of its time. But I love things like "You Never Give Me Your Money," and I think quite a personal, because obviously they're going through the negotiations there and everything, But just the fact that he's so open about it, and he said, I break down and cry, basically, and just how you can see how much, and you saw that in the Get Back documentary, just how much it hurt him for the Beatles. I think all the rest of them were ready to knock it on the head, but I mean, that whole thing was like, you were watching it, you go, A, he's the only reason at this point they're still together, Paul. B, he's also the reason why they're splitting up at exactly the same time, because they all just can't take his control freakery anymore, basically, and his drive. Come on, we're the Beatles. We've got to keep doing the Beatles, and they're just like, they've all had enough. But I love "You Never Give Me Your Money." It's too many, Tim.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I can't think of all of them now, to be honest.
No, that's just a few. Just the ones that come to mind is fine. That's great. Brilliant. Is there anything we can tell our listeners to find out more about you and your writing? Where can I send people to learn more about Rob Williams and his work?
I'm on Twitter, or whatever Twitter's called these days. God knows, could be called anything today. But I'm at Rob Williams 71. I'm on Instagram at Rob Williams 1971, and that's probably the best places to sort of where I talk about projects that are coming up. I've got a brand new comic, if people love comics, are interested, starting in November, which is a creator-owned comic, which we're really excited about, called Petrolhead, which is the story of an obsolete drag racing robot in the future, which has got stunning art by a guy called Piper. And it's kind of like a Pixar movie on the page, that one. So, and it's the type of thing we think, which, it's for all ages, should be able to enjoy it if we've done our job. So, that's coming out November the 8th through Image Comics.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll put all those links in the show notes, of course. It's been great talking to you today about the Beatles and about Blackbird in particular. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tim. No, I've enjoyed it.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night.
Thanks for listening to My Favourite Beatles Song. If you like the podcast, please leave a review or rating, as this helps us to reach new listeners. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at My Favourite Beatles Song and Twitter at MyFaveBeatles. See you next time.
Waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.